that lives deep in my heart, and it says, oh Lord, I love you. I am blessed when I think of your goodness to me. It comforts me daily, but there are times in my life when things don't work out right, and my burdens are heavy, and there's no joy in sight. Put my eyes back on you, for you've always come through, and with this simple refrain, I will bless you, 'cause you've been good to me. Made the way I could not see. Your love came in, lifted me. I won't come through the years. Dry my tears. There is not a closer friend than you. Oh Lord, you have been so good to me, more than this world could ever be. I really wanna thank you, yeah. Lord, I won't complain. Lift my hands, give you praise in the midst of each storm. 'Cause you are worthy. When life's sorrows and heartaches rush in, I will remember. Let the words of my mouth leave no room for doubt, because down through the years you've been faithful. And when I think it all through, oh Lord, it's been you who's been there all the time, and I'm grateful, grateful. Lord, you've been good to me, yeah. I could not see. Whoa, lifting me, and I won't through these years. There is not a closer friend than you. Lord, I know that you know what's best for me, even when my weary eyes can't see.
Greetings, 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 greetings. I am King Clifford Jefferson, Senator Godfrey, the fifth kind of band Jew, son of folk, ruler of Jerusalem. I'm the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, which we know as Jesus Christ, or the Vicar of Christ. It is September 10th, 2025, would be equivalent to the birth year 2975. I greet you in the name of the King, King Edgar the Peaceful. I greet you in the name of the ancestors, all the progenitors, all those who have laid the path down for us to follow. I greet you in the name of my Queen, Sister Galveston from the House of Galveston. I greet you in the name of all of you, in the name of your houses. And once again, it's just beautiful to be here before you, to break bread with you in regards to this marvelous lesson I prepared for you, called The Doctrine of a Worthier Title on the English Common Law. The Doctrine of a Worthier Title on the English Common Law. Give me 1 second and we can start with the small of this lesson. Okay, all right, we can get started. Greetings once again to you all. It's a beautiful day to be here in regards to this lesson, but as you can see, the state of the world at its end is nothing but chaos, abroad and at home. Okay, we see it in each state of the United States. We see the effects of ICE. We see the effects of the implementation of the deportation of immigrants. We see the effects of ICE in places like Los Angeles, Chicago, and we see the continuous uh, killing of our people in the name of suppression, all right, because there's something out there that they are aware of that they don't want to get out, okay? So we have to realize that the universal effect of the conglomerate enticement that was created by those who want to keep what is I'm bringing you suppressed. What I mean by that is meaning that it's only known by few, okay? So it's not worldwide, or it's not known worldwide, or it's not right there in the minds or in the physical dealing aspect of what's causing this problem. Okay, it all has to do with our inheritance. Okay, it all has to do with the Anglo-Saxon Berbers inheritance that's underway. All right, this is why this lesson is called "The Doctrine of a Worthier Title on the English Common Law." If you watch the past lessons that I've done, it would be very important for you to go back and watch those lessons in regards to understanding what it is that we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, trust law. We're going to talk about property again. We're going to talk about monopolies. We're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff we're going to talk about, all right? I got it all plotted and planned out for you, so hold on to your seats. Let's get started. Doctrine of a Worthier Title, English Common Law. I need to pull this up. If you're on your phone or you're on the computer or wherever you're at, you need to pull this up and jot this down. Up, so bear with me. Doctrine of a Worthier Title. Wikipedia is baby food, so we are babies trying to grow into competent, conscious, cognitive adults. Okay, so in order for us to understand uh, who we are as people who are promised inheritance, you must understand the doctrine of Worthier title, meaning that you have a future interest in the property in question. When I say property, I'm talking about land. Okay, places like New York, all right, uh, Patterson, Jersey City, you don't have land. All you have is concrete. Okay, nonetheless, you still have an interest in that land, as well as those fixtures that attach to that land. Okay, but in order for you to understand that, you must understand the doctrine of a worthier title. Okay, the doctrine of a worthier title. Your title is worthier than any other person who claims to have an interest in some type of property here in what we call North America. You have an equitable interest versus a legal interest in the estate that was left from you from your ancestors. Okay? So you really don't need no documentation to support that you are in fact the inheritors of the vast estates that was left here by your ancestors. All you have to do is understand operation of law, okay, in regards to the conveyance of that property, because you were in fact have a worthier title than most people here in what we call North America. In order for you to understand that, you must understand the doctrine of the worthier title. this down. Like, share, subscribe. All those who claim searching for a remedy in regards to how your inheritance is supposed to come, you should be promoting your king. You should show your allegiance to your king. Nor the method, nor the form, nor the conveyance, nor the process of livery or delivery in regard to what was promised you from time immemorial can be conveyed through you other than this manner if it's being brought to you before in this lesson. Okay? This is the only way that you can inherit your lawful estate. Okay? By way of the doctrine of you having a worthier title than most people. Okay? Let's look at it. In the common law of England, all right, most of y'all think we're talking about England over there, but no, England right here. This is England, okay? You speak English. You have the English law, okay? The only problem is the breach in the legal continuity of the English law and those who are supposed to be representing the English law. These are what you call trustees overseeing the trust, okay? What they have done is turn trust based upon trust law into a business, okay? That is the problem. This is when you get into corporate trust, okay, which is not the same as those trusts set by what we call trust law, all right, meaning from a grantor or the settler to the settlee, i.e. the grantee, okay? There's a totally different. We're going to discuss that again as well. Because based upon the grantor and grantee or settler or settler or settlee, we're going to look at those terms. You have a future interest in the property right now that are in the hands, I should say, of people through what we call the process of adverse possession. Okay, all right. So we must go through the certain term, look at the certain terms, the certain phrases that deal with the conveyance of the property to those who have worthier title by way of what we call a condition subsequent, okay, which is a result of a clause put in by the original grantor, okay, based upon how the property in question should have been conveyed. All right. So it says here, in the common law of England, the doctrine of worthier title was the legal doctrine that preferred taking title to real estate by descent. Okay? By descent. Over taking title by devisee or by purchase. Okay? Once again, the doctrine of worthier title was a legal doctrine that preferred taking title to real estate by descent over taken by devisee by purchase or by purchase. Majority of our ancestors who have a worthier title by descent are now receiving property by way of what we call devisee or by purchase. It essentially provides that a remanderment cannot be created in the grantor's heirs, at least not by these words. Okay? What it means by this. Okay? Let's look further into this. Paragraph should explain a lot. The rule provided that where the testator undertook to convey an heir the same estate and land that the heir would take under the laws of inheritance, the heir will be adjudged to have taken title to the land by inheritance rather than by some type of or some form of conveyance, because descent through the bloodline was held to be worthier than a conveyance through some type of legal instrument. Did you hear that? Through a legal instrument under the doctrine that originated under the common law based upon the worthier title, the rule provided that where a testator undertook to convey an heir, this would mean a grantee, all right, a grantee, a beneficiary, all right, an heir of the same estate and land, not some building, not some uh, 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 apartment building or condominium or industrial site. We're talking about the land, estates and land. Before you put that fixture there, that the heir would take under the law of inheritance. The law of inheritance is called lottery of season. That is done by two ways, by law or deed. If you do it by deed, it must confine to the law. If it's done by deed, that's not confined to the law, then it's a fraudulent deed, and that's the purpose of what we call a defeasible title. A defeasible title versus an indefeasible title. Those are terms we're going to talk about today in today's lesson. Doctrine of Worthier title under the English common law. So the rule provides that we're a testator, all right, the grantor, all right, testator. We're not even going to deal with seller or lender because those deals with the terms that they use now as a result of the trust been formulated into a type of what we call corporate business. It did not originate from there. It did not start from there. This all originated from what we call prescription of sovereignty, and prescription of sovereignty is what we call, or a process of what we call eminent domain, which denotes what we call adverse possession. Okay? So the rule provided that where a testator undertook to convey and heir the same estate and land that belongs to the actual testator or the grantor to the grantee, all right, the heir, the same estate and land that the heir would take under the laws of inheritance, the heir would be adjudged to have taken title to the land by inheritance rather than by the conveyance, because descent through the bloodline was held to be worthier than a conveyance through a legal instrument. We must understand what your king is saying to you today, based upon what was promised to you and based upon what was assumed to be our promise, okay? Because promises are broken, okay? Promises are broken. When you break a promise, you're in violation of contract law, okay? An oath, promise means oath. Oath means promise, okay? To abide by what was agreed upon by parties, vice versa, okay? Vice versa. The doctrine of a worthier title, like the rule of Shelley's case, also called what we call uh what's the other term? Queen of Petors. Queen of Petors, okay? The doctrine of a worthier title, like rule of Shelley case, has its origin in attempts by royal courts to defeat various devices contrived by lawyers during the era of feudalism to retain land and their families while avoiding feudal duties and to secure its free inalienability. This is called land grabbing. Land grabbing, water grabbing, what we call uh, 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 theft of property. Okay, the law of usury. Okay, so we said that lawyers during the era of feudalism, we know feudalism goes back to the time of William the Conqueror, to retain lands and their families while avoiding feudal duties and to secure it free secure its free alienability. Creation of a family settlement designed to preserve land within the family, transferred it without feudal duties due to the lords of fee upon this transfer of death. And the death and preserve it from claims of creditors. This is called law of perpetuity. Occupied the ingenuity of many common lawyers during the late Middle Ages. So did efforts to undo the restriction placed by ancestors once they became inconvenient. These concerns underlie the explanation given by Coke of Littleton, which we're not going to today. We just want to deal with the doctrine of a worthy of title, which is as a result of the title that having some deficiency, i.e., defeasible, versus the title having no deficiency, i.e. indefeasible, okay? So we must understand when the possession that our ancestors or the brothers and sisters that are in possession of property that they assume they own, it's must be subject to the doctrine of worthy of title and not the doctrine of conveyance, how it's being used today. Because the way they use it today is unlawful because it deprives you of your rightful interest in the property, which is the equitable interest. How we know it, let's look at the word defeasible. Okay? So let's look at the word defeasible. Write these terms down. Defeasible estate. Okay? All those who have or have a apartment, got a lease, got a mortgage, you need to be watching this lesson because you're being duped. Okay? A defeasible estate is created when a grantor or a soon-to-be grantor transfer land conditionally, meaning that there's terms and conditions based upon the conveyance from the grantor to the grantee, which makes it defeasible or automatically denotes to some type of future interest in the actual grantor. Okay? Very important that you understand this term. Defeasible estate versus an indefeasible estate. Okay? Now you see the word. Let's go back to, I went ahead of myself. Let's go here. Title insurance. Title insurance. The title insurance is a form of indemnity insurance predominantly found in the United States, also in Canada, that insures against a financial loss from defects and titles to real property, and from the invalidity or unenforceability of a mortgage loan. Title insurance ensures defects in title, meaning that if you have a defect in title, it's not an indefeasible title. It's the feasible title. Why? Because it's based upon conditions. It's either the conditions set by the grantor or the conditions set by those who claim to be the grantor, but nothing more than what we call corporate monopoly, overseeing the trust by understanding trust law, but turning it into a business by creating laws to govern the trust as a result of them not being original trustees to convey it properly as according to law. Okay? Title insurance is a form of indemnity insurance predominantly found in the United States and Canada that insures against financial losses from defects in the titles to real property and from the invalidity and unenforceability of a mortgage loan. So everyone who writes now claims to have an interest in property. The title that you have or the deed that you have, which is called a legal instrument, does not assure that you, in fact, own that property clear and out without any other interest party in it, because if you did, it will be called an indefeasible title. Title insurance do not guarantee indefeasible title because they claim that they don't know who the owner is based upon the chain of title that's supported by the county recorder's office. That's not supported based upon how land was supposed to be registered according to what we call Torres land title, which is supposed to be registered with the government. Well, we don't realize that title insurance companies are non-governmental legal entities authorized by the government via corporation to teach the curriculum for those who are professionals who grant title insurance to those who purchase property. And as a result of you purchasing the property from the title insurance company and not the grantor, they already know that the title that you have called a deed in the property shows you that you have a right and interest in possession, but not ownership as a result of the defect in the title, which makes it defeasible. Okay? Let's read it again. Title insurance is a form of indemnity insurance predominantly found in the United States and Canada that insures against a financial loss from defects in a title. A title is what? A legal instrument. All right? It can be legal or equitable. In this case, it's legal, not equitable. To real property from the invalidity or unenforceability of a mortgage loan. Unlike some land registration, all right, land registration versus recorder of deeds. What is the difference between the land registration system and recorder of deeds? There is no difference. Why? Because the land registration system and recorder of deeds serves the purpose as a chain of title, a record. We call it Anglo-Saxon law, the law or judgment. William the Conqueror called it the Doomsday Book, which is a book of all the recordings of estates given out as feudal tenure, okay? And as a result of feudal tenure being abolished, they're just simply called land tenures. Nonetheless, that tenure was based upon a contingency of the grantor as a result of the conveyance, as a result of it not being indefeasible, okay? So unlike some land registration systems in countries outside of the United States recorder of deeds generally do not guarantee an indefeasible title to those recorded titles that's recorded in the county recorder office. For covered risks, title insurers must defend against lawsuits attacking the title and or reimburse the insurer for the actual monetary loss incurred, generally up to the dollar amount of insurance provided by the policy and the policyholder. Okay? So for one, the deed that you have is a defective deed because even though it's recorded at the county recorder's office, based upon land registration system, you're not aware of that you don't own it because title insurance assures defects in the title, which they know is defective because they know the actual owner is the crown or is the king. All right? Very important for you to understand that because the opposite of defeasible title is indefeasible. Okay? Once again, the opposite of indefeasible title is defeasible. And title insurance do not guarantee a indefeasible title. Okay? Very important. Just look at Turing's title. You need to write this down. Simply means land registration. Turing's title means land registration. Land registration simply means recorder of deeds. The purpose of those three, which basically means the same, is to record instruments that belong to the actual owner. You are not the owner. It's just a record so that when the owner goes back or comes back for his property, there is a record showing the chain of title of the grantor to the grantee. Okay? Very important. Storage type. which is named after a European, but title recordation goes back before a gentleman named Torrance. What's his name? Sir Robert Richard Torrance. Torrance title is a land registration and land transfer system in which a state creates and maintains and registers of land holdings, which serves as conclusive evidence turned into feasibility of title of the persons recorded on the register as the proprietor owner and all other instruments recorded on the register. So if Torrance title, which is the land register system, which shows that whatever certificate that you got in lieu of your interest in that land is in fact conclusive because that title is in fact indefeasible. Okay? It's conclusive evidence. All right? Conclusive evidence is controvertible evidence, and conclusive evidence are colloquial terms for evidence introduced to prove a fact that is supposed to be so conclusive that there's no other truth to the matter at point. Okay? So if you got title insurance, then guess what? You got a lot of proving to do. Okay? Because you're going out the owner. The only person that can prove their owner, you must have a conclusive title, which means that that title that you have must be indefeasible. And the government in the United States do not guarantee indefeasible title. Why? Because they did not incorporate Torrance land title. What they did is incorporate a land registration system, but what the land registers that they incorporated was to record instruments that goes back to the owner. It goes back to the person or the entity that does it based upon what we call prescription of sovereignty. Those claim to be the sovereign, which in fact they are not. Okay? Let's see. Ownership of land is transferred by registration of transfer of title instead of by use of deed. See the difference? The registrar provided a certificate of title to the new proprietor, which is merely a copy and related folio of the register. The main benefit of the system is to enhance certainty of titles to land and to simplify dealings involving land. You should hear that. Let's go to the history. Okay? Torrance title. Overview. Listen, brothers and sisters. Don't be fooled. Don't be duped out of your estate. Don't try to protect the state that you don't own because they're going to make an example out of you. Okay? You must prove that you have a clear chain of title to the property that you are in possession of. If you cannot show that, then it's pretty much a defeasible title, which means that the owner has a future interest, and those who have a future interest are those who have a worthier title. Okay? It's those who have a worthy title. That's called the doctrine of a worthier title. Hold on. All right. The Victoria's title system operates on the principle of title by registration, granting the high indefeasible of a registered ownership rather than registration of title. Once again, granting the high indefeasibility of a registered ownership rather than registration of title. The system does not always need for providing or proving a chain of title. Why? Because you know who the grantor is. You go, right, excuse me, somebody saying that you didn't get this to me. Then you give me this, yeah, all right, well, you good to go. All right. You don't need a court of law if the grantor conveyed it to you. Okay. So the system does not always need for proving a chain of title. Now, if that grantor is not there, then that needs to be a proof of chain of title. Tracing title back in time through the series of documents that's on or recorded by the land registration system that's already in place. Tracing title back to the time through a series of documents. The state guarantees title, and the system is usually supported by compensation schemes for those who lose their title due to private fraud or error in the state's operation. Okay? Y'all better listen to your king. Why? Let's look at the history. Background. Background. Torrance land title in regards to land registration or property that's indefeasible versus defeasible. Because defeasible titles, once again, were according to common law, frowned upon. I'm not just saying that. That's not my thoughts. All right. That's the English common law. Let's look at it. Background. In regards to Torrance title, which assures indefeasible titles. At common law, the vendor of land, i.e., vendor, needs to show his or her ownership of the land by tracing the chain of ownership back to the earliest grant. You hear that? Grant, charter, all right? Not a deed, a grant or a charter of land by the crown to its first owner. The document relating to the transaction with the land are collectively known as title deeds or change of title. So every document found at the county recorder's office are called title deeds. There are a chain of title going back to the presumed person that was in possession. It's not the owner because they know who the owner is. The owner is the crown, which doesn't need to show it by way of recording. Okay? Why would the owner have to go down and record his stuff knowing he owned it? Okay? That's only done to prove fraud because when fraudulent stuff was happening, that's why the county recorder office was created. Okay? So the document relating to transacting with the land are collectively known as title deed or chains of title. This event may be occurred hundreds of years prior and could have dozens of intervening changes in the land ownership. A person's ownership over land could also be challenged, particularly causing great legal expenses to landowners and hindering the development. Okay? Very important that under the common law, dealing with land registration system, such as the Torrance land law, versus the recorder's office of deeds, it should trace it back to the original owner, okay, based upon the chain of title, all right, based upon any deed or title deed that's filed at the county recorder office, okay, which does not need to have title assurance as a result of the county recorder office not able to prove who the original owner is, which makes the actual instrument filed there defective. Okay? We must understand what it is that your king is explaining to you. Okay? Let's get there. So let's look at the feasibility again. The feasible estate versus indefeasible estate, because you had an indefeasible estate, it would link back or show the chain of title back to what? The crown of England under the common law. Okay? If it does not show that, then pretty much your title or interest in it is defeasible. Okay? Indefeasible state. Not to be confused with indefeasibility. A defeasible estate is created when a grantor transfer lands conditionally, which we just read previously. Upon the happening of the event or condition stated by the grantor, not a seller, not a lender, all right, not a title insurance officer, not a broker, okay? We must understand that these are not the persons to be conveying property on behalf of the grantor. Hell, they don't even know who the grantor is. We just found out who it was, the Crown. Okay? A defeatable estate is created when the grantor transfer lands conditionally. When somebody else transfer lands, it's called alienation of property, which is a violation of the law that prevent alienation of property by what we call substitution. Upon the happening of the event or condition stated by the grantor, the transfer may void or at least subject the annulment. This means condition subservient. Okay? All right? Or what we call executory limitations. Okay? These are some of the things that do have in future interest of property as a result of the property being defeasible. Okay? So a defeatable estate is created when a grantor transfer land conditionally, means conditions attached to it. Upon this happening, the event or condition the stated by the grantor, the transfer may void or at least subject the annulment, meaning the language and the conveyance as established by the grantor to convey will make it indefeasible title based upon how the title was conveyed to you, which can be three different ways. Defeasible, determinable, defeasible executory limitations, and defeasible contingent subsequent, which you're going to talk about right now. Okay. So it says, an estate not subject to such condition is called an indefeasible estate. Okay? So we see the difference. Write that down. Historically, the common law has frowned on the use of a defeasible estate as it interferes with the owner's enjoyment of their property, and as such has made it difficult to create a valid future interest. What? What did he just say? And defeasible estate under the common law is frowned upon because it violates or interferes with the owner's enjoyment of their property. So that tells you if you got title insurance, they are not the owners because the owner does not know that his property is being sold and being subject to what we call land grabbing. Okay? Land grabbing. We're going to talk about that in a second. Which is done by corporate trust company known as monopolies. Okay? Known as monopolies. Historically, the common law has frowned on the use of defeasible estates as it interferes with owners' enjoyment of their property, and as such has made it difficult to create a valid future interest in the property. Okay? Very important we understand that. What are some types of defeasible property? Let's see. Fee simple determinability, free simple executory limitations, and free simple condition subsequent. I like that. I like this one. Wow. We understand a defeasible estate has what? Everyone said, a future interest. Okay? That future interest can be vesting rights, it can be reversionary rights, it can be remandment rights. Nonetheless, you have a future interest in property as a result of it being defeasible. Why? Because as an heir, by the doctrine of a worthier title, you're supposed to inherit the property that's indefeasible because that property is overseen by the crown. Does that make sense to anybody out there in TV land? Does that make sense to anybody out there? The simple fee simple subject to condition subsequent. A fee simple subject to a condition subsequent is created when the words of a grant support the conclusion that the grantor intended to convey a fee simple absolute, but has attached a condition to the grant so that if a specified future event happens, the grantor will get what? His fee simple absolute back, provided that the grantor exercises his right of entry or power of termination of fee simple, which is nothing more than a defeasible estate. All right? We know if it's indefeasible, it must go back to the crown. And the only person that exercise an indefeasible estate in lieu of what we call condition subsequent by way of right of entry is the crown. They are not the crown. Okay? They are not the crown. Well, y'all better listen. A fee simple subject to condition subsequent is created when the words of a grant support a conclusion that the grantor, the owner, intended to convey conditions, a fee simple absolute, but has attached, okay, a condition to the grant so that if a specified future event happens, the grantor will get his fee simple absolute back, provided that the grantor exercise his right of entry or power of termination. What is the right of entry? Let's look at that real quick. What is the right of entry? Right of entry refers to one's rights. Listen, y'all. When there's a defeatable estate out there that was conveyed to you based upon some type of loan that you assume got from somebody who now has to secure interest in the property, had to prove he is in fact the owner, now you have forfeited your right of entry to the property. All right? As a result of you not understand the condition of the defeatable estate. It's a defeatable estate has a right of future interest. What future interest right? The right of re-entry refers to one right to take or resume possession of the land or the right of a person to go onto another real property without committing trespass. It also refers to the grantor's power to retake real estate from a grantee in the case of a fee simple subject to condition subsequent. Okay? Very, very important that you understand the purpose and intent of the defeatable estate based upon future interest, which is one future interest is a right of entry. Okay? The right of entry to condition subsequent. What is condition subsequent? Let's look at that before we move forward. If you're going to play the game, play the game. In the philosophical and legal context, a condition subsequent is a defined event which terminates a proposition or a contractual obligation, in contrast to a condition precedent, which starts rather than ends, okay, obligation. Once again, condition subsequent is defined event which terminates a proposition or contractual obligation, and contrast to a condition precedent. A condition subsequent brings the event or obligation to an end rather than being necessary for the event to obligation to occur. Okay, so once again, condition subsequent is one of those conditions that were given in what we call a feasible estate, which denotes to a defeasible estate as a result of it having title insurance, because title insurance is put in place to assure to preserve. Now I won't use that word. Title insurance is put in place to assure that as a result of your loss, that you are compensated as a result of that deed or that title that you have in your possession is in fact fraudulent or defective. Okay? Very, very, very important. All right? Let's go back to feasible estates. Let's read a little bit more. This is very, very, very important. This part right here. The right of entry is not automatic, brothers and sisters. So you just can't go take it back because you would be no different than them when they took it to what we call adverse possession, which is hostile, open encroachment, etc., under what we call the eminent domain power of the state. No, you don't do it that way. You have to do it lawfully by operation of law. The right of entry is not automatic, but rather must be exercised to terminate the fee simple subject to conditions subsequent, which is what? The right of entry. To exercise right of entry, the holder must take substantial steps to recover possession in title, for example, by what? Filing a lawsuit. Physical entry is not required, but the holder must do more than just proclaim an intent to take it back. So don't all that talking about taking back the land, taking the land back. If you ain't in court, that's hogwash. You out there just wasting your breath. Okay. If you're not taking steps in a court of law, in a proper court of law, because we got courts of law that are not in fact proper. Okay. That are not proper. Let's continue. Recorder of deeds, land registration systems, or torrents registration systems means the same to me, brothers and sisters. It all means the same to me because it's recording the owner's property. Okay? It's recording the grantor's property. It's recording the testator's property that's given to somebody who's in possession of it as a result of the instrument that they use to show the right of possession, which is they call a title deed, which is defective. Why? Because it's indefeasible. Why? Because you have title insurance. Why? Because you cannot, in fact, prove it that you got it from the actual owner. The government know that. They just don't want you to know that. Why? Because they incorporated the non-governmental entity called the title insurance company to insure professionals to give title insurance, and this is called what we call GILs. Okay, competition law, antitrust law. Okay, this is what all that encompasses, which we're talking about right now. Frederick Douglass, anyone know who that is? Was the first recorder of deeds, or the deeds of registry, which was also called the land registration system or the county recorder system, or what we call Torrance land title, which is to record the owner's property. 1 second. Sorry about that. Once again, county recorder's office. Everybody been down this, so you should know what it is that they do. Because you watch this lesson, I'm not telling you to go down there and file anything on the county recorder office, because if you do, you'll be in a world of trouble if you don't understand what it is that you're doing, right? Recorder of deeds or deed of registry is a government office tasked with maintaining public records and documents, especially records relating to real estate ownership, that provides persons other than the owner of the property with real rights over that property. What? Rights over that property that you don't have, because why? You're not the owner. Let's look at what this says, rights over property. Property law, okay? That goes back into property law. We're going to touch on that in a second, all right? So recorder of deed, as we just read it, all right, and they put Frederick Douglass at the helm, which provided a way to record persons' interest in property that are in the possession of that property other than the owner who actually owns the property. So that means it is a record of the owner's property. We call it Doomsday Book. The Ten Commandments in the Bible, it's called the Last Judgment, all right, when the king returns. Very important for you to understand this sequence of events, all right? Let's go further. We understand how to get a defeasable estate back, which belongs to the owner. It said what? A court of law filed a lawsuit to terminate defeat, simple, determinable, or executory limitation by way of a lawsuit, okay, based upon conditions subsequent pursuant to right of entry, to power of termination based upon what? Some future interest. What does future interest mean? Let's look at that word, since we have not looked at it yet. Future interest. In property law and in real estate, a future interest is a legal right to property ownership that does not include the right to present possession or enjoyment of the property, meaning that you don't have it yet. Okay? You're not enjoying the property yet. Why? Because it's either vacant, i.e. allodial, or it's being used right now through what we call adverse possession through prescription of sovereignty. Not through lottery of season, but through prescription of sovereignty through the eminent domain power or compulsory purchase of the state as a result of it being abandoned under the power of what we call interstate, heirs not being there. When property is cheap, it resolves interstate, which means that there are no heirs. So there is no future interest of heirs as a result of you not being there, the owner not being there. So as a result of that, it's subject to what we call land grabbing. Land grabbing is based upon you taking property and making money off it, whether you're a profit, non-profit, you're still dealing with it from a corporate business and not a corporate trust, okay? A corporate business versus a corporate trust. Whether a corporate trust and a corporate business, they are corporations, both of them, but they have different aims, interests, and objectives that we need to discuss, okay? Let's talk about it. In property law and real estate, a future interest is a real estate to property ownership that does not include the right to the present possession and enjoyment of the property. Future interests are created on the formation of a defeasible estate. So when they gave you title insurance, they gave you a window out, because a defeasible estate is what? has a future interest, and one of those future interests is based upon the doctrine of a worthier title. Okay? Of a worthier title. You just have to prove that you have a worthier title. All right? Future interests are created on the formation of a defeatable state that is an estate with a condition or event triggering transfer of possessory ownership. A common example in landlord-tenant relationship. The landlord may own a house, but has no general right to enter it while it is being rented. The conditions triggering the transfer of possession first to the tenant, then back to the landlord are usually detailed in a lease. These are called reversionary rights or abandonment rights, okay? Based upon the presumption that the landlord is in fact the owner, but guess what, brothers and sisters? He is not the landlord. The landlord is just operating what we call a monopoly, a corporate monopoly, controlling the trust based upon trust business and not trust law, okay? Very important that you understand the Jews I'm giving you. Let's look at it. Some of the future interests are vesting rights, right, in regards to future interests, all right, which is still subject to the doctrine of what? A worthier holder. Up here. Right there. See it? Everybody see it? The doctrine of a worthier title is subject to the rules in Shelby's case, which are rules against perpetuities, which is based upon restraint on alienation, which is called queen impetuous, passed by Edward I, the King of England, as a plantagenet crown, which we are the heirs of, based upon our incorporation. Okay? Our incorporation wasn't based upon land grabbing. It was based upon restoration of the land to the original heirs of the land through the power of escheatment, which could only be done through the king, okay, as the power of the future interest, okay, through what we call right of entry by way of condition subsequent, okay. I just learned this stuff a couple of days ago. So one of the vesting rights in future interest is this. What is a vesting right? Vesting means granting a person an immediate right to present or future enjoyment of property. In plain English, one has the right to vest assets that cannot be taken away by any third party, even though it may not yet possess the asset. Okay? So no third party has a right to property that belongs to you by way of inheritance because it's based upon how it was conveyed to you without a third party. Okay, all of a sudden now third party popping up talking about you, they got an interest in it. That's bull crap. Why? Because you don't know your position. You are an heir. You are a beneficiary. They are the trusters that were put in place to oversee the trust, i.e., cess to quid. When the right interest or title to the present or future possession of legal estate can be transferred by its holder to any other person, it is termed a vested interest with respect to that holder. Okay? That's one of them. What's another one? Reversion. What is reversion? It's for the transfer. A reversionary right is what it's when a granted estate is absolutely vested in the grantor. Okay? Not a third party, not an alien, but the grantor. Whether it's an heir, whether it's a trustee, or whether it's the grantor himself. Okay? Very important. Then also the right of remanderment. Remanding is the future interest in a third party that vests upon the natural conclusion of the grant to the original grantee, and in the interest in the property that if left over or remains after the original grantee is finished possessing it. So that meant that these are what we call defeasible estates. These are called defeasible estates, which are subject to what we call future interests. We just read it, my brothers and sisters. How come we have a hard time understanding it? And it said these type of states were frowned upon by the crown. Historically, common law has frowned on the use of the feasible states as it interferes with the crown or the owner or the king who is the owner enjoyment of their property, and as such has made it difficult to create a valid future interest. What interest would that be? An intel interest. You got fee simple, which is defeasible, and you got fee tail, which is indefeasible. So which one do you want? Fee simple or fee tail? Defeasible or indefeasible? Right now you have defeasible fee simple, all right, which we know is subject to conditions subsequent as a result of the future interest that the grantor or owner has in it. Okay? In that case, that would be me, the king. All right? Let's get it. So we see the feasible states are those states that have a future interest, and that future interest is based upon those who have a worthier title. Those who have a worthier title, my brothers and sisters. I'm not saying that. They're saying it. Future interest. So besides who owning the land now, based upon the future interest, are you that party? Okay? Are you that party? Are you subject to the doctrine of the worthier title? Are you? Can you prove it? Because that's what we aim to prove, that we are in fact these people. Are you these people? Because we are. Okay? We are these people. I'm going to show you in law and precedent. All right? I'm going to show you in law and in precedence. All right? Well, how can I do that? Let's see. '1911 Encyclopedia Britannica on Berbers. So we're saying we're Anglo-Saxons, but we are Berbers who are Anglo-Saxons. Because everybody else want to call them Anglo-Saxons, but cannot prove that they are Berbers. Okay? Or anybody else for that matter. Because everybody want to identify with Anglo-Saxons, but cannot prove it based upon genealogy. Okay? Like we see in Imre Ahmad Hassan. You just can't say you're Anglo-Saxon because you color skin. You got to prove that you're in fact a part or a part of the group of those people. Okay? You got to prove that you're in fact a part of that body of politics. Okay? So we incorporated as the Anglo-Saxon Berbers or the English Berbers because that's who they were. Who were Berbers whose language that they spoke were English. We're going to use 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica to prove that the Berbers are, in fact, the wise men of the wise council whose government and whose laws were in fact the laws of the Berbers, and the laws that they had were the Anglo-Saxon laws. Okay? I'm gonna prove it. White people stole this from us, called the white Anglo-Saxons. Okay? But the Anglo-Saxons were not white. They were dark skinned like us. Okay? They were Berbers. Let's prove it. The fact has been emphasized by Dr. R.G. Latham, who writes, all that is not Arabic in the Kingdom of Morocco, all that is not Arabic in French province of Algeria, and all that is in Arabic in Tunis, Tripoli, and Fez is Berber. The explanation lies in profound distinction of character. The Arab is a herdsman and a nomad. The Berber is an agriculturist and a townsman. The Arab has built his social structure on the Quran, which inculcates absolutism, aristocracy, and theocracy. The Berber, despite his nominal Mohammedanism, is a democratic with his Jimna or Wittiman and his Qanun or unwritten code, the Magna Carta, of the individual liberties as opposed to the community's good. So if that is in fact the case that the Berbers' democratic government was called Wittiman, let's go look up Wittiman and see what it says. Same people. Yeah. Wittima or Wittima, Witten or Wittima. Okay. A wise man or meeting to meet. The National Council in England in Anglo-Saxon time, its origin is obscure. There is sometimes resemblance between it and the two assemblies mentioned by somebody who's supposed to be keeping a record. As I always say, he who writes your books sets your timeline. Time never was when we were not. So life time began, the time would come when we would be no more. Okay, so we're gonna go to our own record. In Anglo-Saxon England, 7th, 8th century, it seems certain that each of the larger kingdoms, Kent, Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, had a separate witten or council, but there is a difference of opinion as to whether this was identical with or distinct from the folk moot in which theoretically at least all freemen had the right to appear. Hence, freeman, 14th Amendment. We went from slaves to freemen. We were freedmen because that's our original, that's a descendant of freemen. Okay, before we became freedmen, we were freemen. So when they freed us, they restored us back to our status as freemen. Okay, but it's based upon you to choose what body of politics, what democratic government are you going to partake of as those freemen. Was it the Whitman government? We go, Whitman was the wise government that set up this for us prior to us coming to the understanding of what it is they did for us. So these are, in fact, were the angels, okay? How we know it, look at what law that the Whitman set up, who were, in fact, the Berbers, as stated. Alfred the Great, here and there, all right? He's right there. The power of Witten vary according to the personality of the reigning king, being considerably under a weak ruler, but considerably under a strong one. Generally speaking, it diminished as the years went by, and from necessary incentives, its members became merely attesting witnesses, and duties are shown by the preamble of the laws of Mani, king of Wessex, and 200 years later by the preamble of those of Alfred the Great, which means wise elf. Okay, let's go a little further. Here we go. The number of councillors attending the meeting of Witten varied considerably from time to time, and Witten one held at Luton in November 8D 931, where the two archbishops, two Welsh princes, 7 bishops, 17 bishops, 15 aldermen, 5 abbots, and 59 ministries. and another, that of Winchester of A.D. Anastromenes 934 of the year of our Lord, was present to 2 archbishops, 4 Welsh kings, and 17 bishops, 4 abbots, 12 aldermen, and 52 ministries. These are perhaps the fullest extent list of Edgar's Wittemann. Did you hear that? Edgar's Wittemann. So that means King Edgar, our Jesus Christ, was in fact a Berber, because the government of the Berbers was called Wittemann or Witten, called the Wise Council, brothers and sisters. And their law was called the Anglo-Saxon law, governing what? Real property. Let's prove it. 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, real property. These are my sources. Real property, the land law of England and of countries whose law is based upon that of England, stand in a peculiar position which can be understood only by the outline of its history. Hence the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says that all those who are emancipated by the 13th Amendment, based upon their citizenship, must be construed to the English common law and ruled in light of its history. So if you own real property and you want to keep that property, goddamn it, you better know the history in regards to real property, in regards to who owns it, and those were the people from England, which is right here in North America. How I know it? Just look at the laws. Mention the Magna Carta, right? You can't play with it. At the time of Glanville, a tenant had a greater power of alienation over land which he had purchased, terra equita, than over the land which he had inherited. But by the time of Braxton, the heir had ceased to have any interest in either kind of land. Did you hear that? The heir had ceased to have any interest in either kind of land. That means that the land has exceeded because there are no heirs. This is called interstate. Now it falls under the eminent domain power of the state. Let me give you a good picture if I still have it. Actually, how close. The laws were most successful. It was enacted by the Magna Carta, the one you've seen in 1911 Encyclopedia with the Britannica, all right? The Magna Carta, the unwritten code. It was enacted by the Magna Carta that, once again, those freemen should not give or sell so much as his land as to leave an amount insufficient to perform his services to his lord. In spite of the provision, the right of the lords were continually diminished by subjugation until the passing of what? Of the statute of Queen Imperator. Alienation by a tenant-in-chief of the crown without license was a ground for forfeiture under Edward III, by which a fine was substituted. It's right there in the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica of the Plantagenet King in regards to the laws that are still in place based upon the alienation of land that belongs to heirs, okay? Who, based upon the doctrine of Worthier title, because you are, in fact, of the blood, you have a future interest that does not need to prove it in the court of law, and result of it being indefeasible versus defeasible. Okay? We must understand the language. Okay? Let's go further. Let's see. Landlord game. We call it monopoly. A landlord game is a board game patented. When you're dealing with patents, you're talking about grants. You're talking about grants, you're talking about charters. You're talking about a charter, it can only be granted by the king. Okay? And the king grants charters or patents for monopolies, i.e., corporate trusts. Okay? And they cannot violate antitrust law. Okay? They cannot violate antitrust law or Shelby's law, or what we call the statute of laborers as set by Edward III, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so the landlord game, which is progenitor of the game Monopoly, all right, which was the game based upon what? Land grabbing. Okay, you can't do any what we call trading, marketing, etc. until you have the land to do it on. Okay, very important. All right, land in the wrong spot. Guess what? You wind up in jail. In 1902 and 1903, Maggie designed the game and play tested it in Arden, Delaware. She tested it out, brothers and sisters. The game was created to be a practical demonstration of the present system of land grabbing with all the usual outcomes and consequences. The same thing you see in this game was the same thing you see in the Monopoly game, which is the same thing you see around the world being implemented, just like it was done here as testing. Okay? How do we know this? How do we know this, brothers and sisters? Let's look at it. What is land grabbing? What is land grabbing? If you're grabbing, damn sure don't mean that you own it. If you don't own the land, that means you're taking the land. When you take something that belongs to you, we call it stealing. Land grabbing is a large-scale acquisition of land through buying or leasing of large pieces of land by domestic and transnational companies, governments, and individuals. These are called corporate trusts, state monopolies, okay? State monopolies. Very, very, very important. Not just land grabbing, water grabbing, food grabbing, and everything else you can think of, okay? This is what they do. Why am I saying this, okay? Why is this very important? Let's look at it. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of it. Competition law. We know what competition is, right? It's all about competition. Corner store, food chain, car dealers, all of it is based upon monopolies, okay? A monopoly, McDonald's, all of them. Let's look at it. All is based upon competition laws, okay? Labor laws, wages, etc. Competition laws. Let's get it, y'all. Let's get it. We shouldn't have to compete with anybody when everything belongs to us, okay? The land and everything on the land belongs to us. For you to be taking it and using it and making money violates competition law. It violates antitrust law. Why? Because you turn what was left in the trust into a business for you to make money off our weakness, which is our ignorance, as a result of the trust being the beneficiaries of the trust, knowing that they are the trustees of the trust on behalf of the grantor who created the trust and had designed it based upon how it's supposed to be conveyed, based upon trust law. They're not using trust laws, brothers and sisters. They're using competition law. And they're competing with you. Why? Because You are the trustors. Okay? Let's look at it. And support your king. Let's start spreading this word. Better start by getting on these platforms. Okay? I am who you should be voting for. Why? Because everything that the government do is based upon competition internationally, domestic, non-domestic, national, international. Every state is based upon competition law. Okay? Competition law, trade, what we call commerce, national, international. It's all based upon competition. But you cannot violate antitrust law or anti-monopoly laws, or because why? It's called trust busting. You're taking something that does not belong to you. Let's look at it. Competition law is a field of law that promotes that seeks to maintain a market competition by regulating anti-competitive conduct by companies. Competition law is implemented through public and private enforcement. It's also known as antitrust law or just antitrust, anti-monopoly laws, and trade practice laws. The act of punishment for antitrust measures or attacking monopolistic companies known as trust is commonly known as trust busting. Okay? Trust busting, trying to expose those who are breaking the trust, okay, who are breaking the agreement. In order for you to understand that, you must go back to the origin and how the church was set up. Let's go back there. History. You don't have to go all the way back to Rome. You can start right here in the Middle Ages. Rome existed before the Middle Ages. We don't need to go back that far. We're going to go back to time immemorial, Richard I, 1189. Okay? Legislation in England to control monopolies and restricted practice was enforced well before the Norman conquest. That means when William the Conqueror invaded England, okay? Laws governing engrossment, forestalling, raising the prices, all right? What we call tax, what we call inflation, all right? These laws were already in place by our ancestors before the invaders got here, all right? Legislation in England to control monopolies or what we call corporate trusts or trust businesses and restricted practice was enforced well before the Norman conquest. The Doomsday Book recorded that for stalling the practice of buying up goods before they reached market and then inflating the prices was one of the three forfeitures that King Edward the Confessor could carry out throughout all England. Okay? The Doomsday Book is what we call the Anglo-Saxon law, the law of judgment. What law of judgment we're talking about is the statutes we're reading today. It's the law that we're reading today. These are the prophetic laws that close the gap on the uh, on the um, on the time span that has passed on the interest of the people and what was going on in that time span and the interest of the people. And now it has shut that door and has brought to light everything that was hidden behind that door. Okay? That you're able to see it in real time, and all the statues that we see today apply to that time where the statues were not in your foresight. Okay? So the legislation of England to control monopolies and restricted practices was enforced well before William the Conqueror invaded England. It also went all the way up to Henry III, right here. Under Henry III, son of Henry II, parts of Henry III, son of John, son of Henry II, no, parts of Henry III, son of Henry III was the son of John, son of Henry II, son of Godfrey the fifth, kind of Anjou, son of Folk, ruler of Jerusalem. He was the son of John. So on Henry III, the act was passed in 1266 to fix spread out prices in correspondence with grain prices laid down by the assize courts. The assize courts were established by the Assize Clarendon Act of 1164. The courts were enacted in 1166. Penalties for breach included immersion, pillory, and treble. A 14th century statute labeled forestallers as oppressors of the poor and the community at large and enemies of the whole country under King Edward III statute labels of 1349, which we'll talk about in 1 second. Okay? So competition laws go all the way back to the Middle Ages as a result of what we call unconstitutional or unlawful guilds being created. What is a guild? What is a guild? How many of you know what a guild is? Let's look at it. Help me, everyone. Looking at some responses from the appellate court. Looking good, looking good. All right. A guild. What is a guild? A guild. A guild is an association of artisans and merchants who oversee the practice of their craft trade and in a particular territory. The earliest types of guilds formed as organizations of tradespeople belonging to professional associations. They sometimes depend on grants of letter patents from the minor or other ruler to enforce the flow of trade to their self-employed members and to retain ownership of tools and supplies of materials, but most were regulated by local government. So we have local government versus the crown or parliament or the monarch issuing out the letter patent. When we say local government, we are in fact talking about a state monopoly. Okay, a state monopoly because the state is not the crown and the crown is not the state. Okay, we're talking about a state monopoly. Okay, very, very important. So guilds are those who are associated with professional associations, which in turn deals with occupational licensing. Occupational licensing. The ones who sold you your deed, i.e. title insurance, those are the ones who were educated and do occupational licensing by what we call occupational closure, which means that there was a boundary of those who can associate themselves with that profession. Okay? Now, everyone was attributed or had the interest or had a right to that profession based upon the guilds. Okay? Very important to understand that. All right? A guild was a occupational licensed profession, artisan, apprentice, etc. You had to go through the education, though. All right. All that fell under what we call competition law. That competition law cannot violate the law that's created the competition, because the one who started it all, everyone is trying to compete with that now. Okay, so it's very important to understand that if you have the right to do trade or business in the eyes of trust law versus trust business, then you must go back to the true understanding of trust law and not trust business. Because you understand from trust business, then you have to go back to these guilds, which goes back to the monopolies, which were a violation of the statute of monopolies, which was created by who? King James the First. Not for Scotland, not for Ireland, but for the Kingdom of England, going all the way back to Edward the First, okay? The statute of laborers. All right, very, very important for you to understand that. Occupational licensing for guilds. Let's look at it. Occupational licensing for guilds, such as what we call a monopoly. Okay. Occupational licensing, also called licensure, is a form of government regulation requiring a license to pursue a particular profession or vacation for compensation. It's related to what we call occupational enclosure. This can also involve what we call political corruption. Okay, because it's denotes a barrier to entry. Now everybody else can practice it. Okay, now everybody can practice it, and it can result in what we call anti-competitive practices. Okay, very important. Anti-competitive practices. So occupational licensing, also called licensure, to be able to be in a position to give one a license, is a form of a government regulation. It's government regulated, whether it's dealing from a state monopoly acting as a government, requiring those license, those to become licensed through the education of a non-governmental legal entity. Because the title insurance company is a nonprofit, non-governmental legal entity authorized by a government to incorporate, to teach occupational license to those who take vocational or professional courses in title insurance, which is an occupational closure to only a given field. Okay, so it's an occupational closure. What is that? What does that mean? Occupational closure. Okay, occupational closure. In sociology, an occupational closure or professional demarcation is a process whereby a trade or occupation vocation transforms itself or tries to transform itself into a true profession by closing off entry to profession to all but those people who are suitably qualified, as defined by practitioners already qualified, already practicing the occupation in any given jurisdiction. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? This practice can be achieved by licensures, occupational license, and professional certification. Barrier entry to all except those who have passed certain entrance examinations and grades of training, or by allowing entry only to those who have gained membership of specific professional bodies, a professional association, such as a particular medical association, or what? A bar association. Okay? Very important to understand that. And most especially craft unionism as contrasted with industrial unionism in countries where sufficient union membership as percentage of workers in the occupation can be achieved despite the prevailing gradient of union busting. Okay, so occupational closure or barrier entry results from occupational license, which goes back or how they start in what we call guilds. Okay, guilds, brothers and sisters. Understand what's going on. history. Origin of this process is said to have been with guilds during the Middle Ages, when professionals fought for exclusive rights to practice their crafts or trade as journeymen and to engage in unpaid apprentices. Okay, that's why they're called nonprofit. Non-for-profit, nonprofit. Okay, or not for profit. Okay, very important to know the difference between the two. All right, let's get it. Trust business. Let's look at it versus trust law. How many of you went in debt like we going to debt? How many of you have went in debt like we going in debt today? Somebody say something out there. Trust business. Listen, trust business and where that business of trust started. It started in the Gilded Age, all right? When we were emancipated from slavery, all right? This is called the Gilded Age, which started the Progressive Age, which started the political corruption and the institutional corruption in regards to those who are supposed to be overseeing the trust for the beneficiary. What they did was turn that trust governed under trust law into a business trust governed under business law by corporations known as what? Corporate trust. To take over the corporate market power that violates antitrust law, okay? Which violates the statute of laborers, which violates the doctrine of the Worthier title. Okay? Let's get it, brothers and sisters. Trust or corporate trust is a large grouping of business interests with significant market power, which may be embodied as a corporation or as a group of corporations that cooperate with one another in various ways. Okay? Very, very important to understand that. The use of corporate trust during this period is historians reached reasons for the name of antitrust law. Did you hear that? Trust business brought up the term antitrust law. Okay? We must understand what's going on. And a lot has to do with the corporations that are still in existence today. Okay? Let's get it. Trust business, which from the historical reasoning of the name antitrust law, and a broader sense of the term, is related to trust law. A trust is a legal arrangement based on the principles developed and recognized over centuries in English law, specifically in equity, by which one party conveys legal possession and title of certain property to a second party called a trustee. Everyone following along? Hope you are. Right? Now, trust law and trust business is not the same. You didn't have trust business until you got into the Gilded Age, which started with the creation of corporations through the first and second industrial age. Okay? The business of corporate trust came into use in the 19th century United States during the Gilded Age as a legal device to consolidate industrial activity across state lines. Did y'all hear that? Did y'all hear that? I don't think y'all heard that. I don't think you heard it. Judge Thomas Sumner Jr., did you hear that? When we were freed from slavery, when the life, liberty, and property votes were returned to us by the first section of the 14th Amendment, which dissolved that United States government, whether they were called Union of States or the States and Confederates, that, excuse my French, shit was dissolved, all right? And that the progressive age was put in place to stop what was done under the progressive era, under what we call the disguise of trust business in violation of trust law, which violates antitrust law, going back to the originators of trust law, okay? So it says the business or corporate trust came into the existence in the 19th century. So what was it called prior to the 19th century? All right. Before you had the Rockefellers, okay, before you had Standard Oil Company, Ocean Elevator Company, before you had these things in place, what was trust law governed under? Let's look at it, brothers and sisters. Trust law. Because y'all don't hear me. I come to shake up things. Trust law. It didn't say trust business, it says trust law. A trust is a legal relationship in which the owner of property or any transferable right gives it to the another to manage or use solely for the benefit of the designated person. That means that the trustee, based upon the trust, which is called a cestus quae, which was given by what? The settlor for a trustee, okay, on the behalf of a beneficiary, okay? Very important for you to understand trust under trust law under the common law, which denotes to a settlor preparing a estate for a beneficiary. Okay? Very important for you to understand this. All right? History. Very important. Right here. English common law. Roman law has well-developed concepts of the trust, which we can exclude Rome, because Rome, we ain't dealing with Rome right now. In terms of anticipatory trust created by a will, this is called alienating of property due a last will testament. This is called uh, voluntary versus involuntary alienation of land or property. All right, very important to understand it too. It says that Roman law has well-developed concept of trust in terms of a testamentary trust was created by a will, but never developed the concept of intravenous living trust, which means two parties, which apply while the creator lives. This was created by a later common law jurisdiction. Personal trust law developed in England during the 12th and 13th century. In medieval English trust law, the settlor was known as the fiefur, to use, while the trustee was known as the feoffee, to use, and the bishopric was known as what? The cestus quae of the, or what we call cestus quae trust. All right? Very important for you to understand that. Not from business trust, from trust law. Very, very different. All right? Legal historians believe that inter vivos trusts were first developed for the benefit of the Franciscan friars, who were forbidden to own any sort of property. Benefactors would convey land for the use of the friars to suitable local persons, the fee to hold what? Legal fee simple title, whether it was a fee determinable, fee extraordinary limitation, or fee what we call conditions of secret. Nonetheless, it was fee simple and it had future interest, which denote to those who are worthier of that title. And while promising to allow the friar to live on the and receive the profits of the land. However, the fee had no legal obligation to the beneficiary in English common law. So after the death of the fee, there was no one to enforce the promise made by the fee of his ancestors. You hear that? This is a result of what we call common recovery. Let's go on. As to the proliferation of the use of impact tax revenues in complicated land sales, King Henry VIII pressured Parliament to pass the Statute of Uses in 1535. This is all guards to what we call the inheritance tax, okay? The statute of uses in 1535, by the way, is still in New Jersey by statute, 46.3-9, which purported to abolish uses by executing them. This transferred title from the fee to the beneficiary. However, lawyers and judges soon found holes in the statute, and courts held that the statute did not apply if the fee had active duties to perform. The courts began to refer to these title holders with active duties to manage the property as trustees of a trust in place of medieval terminology. There. What was the Gilded Age? All right, because business trust didn't come into the 19th century, all right, during the Gilded Age, but trust law existed prior to that, okay? We came from the trust law, and we know trust law originated from the common law, okay? Very important. What is the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age, we know the word gilded means golden, means a thin layer of gold. It says United States history, the Gilded Age or the Golden Age, is a period from about the late 1870s to the late 1890s, which occurred between the Reconstruction era and the Progressive era. It was named by the historians after Mark Twain's novel, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. Yes, it's in fact a tale of today. It denotes to a time and era when there was political corruption from institutional corruption that was at that time. When we were being emancipated from slaves and became citizens, this was called the Gilded Age, when the corporation took over the estate, which was left from us, by usurping trust law into what we call business law, okay? To what we call monopolies. This was a violation of what we call the statutes of monopolies. How many of you know that? Let's look at the statutes of monopolies before we go there. Statutes of monopolies. By King James, not for Scotland and Ireland, but for England. The statute of monopolies was an act of the Parliament of England, notably as the first statutory expression of the English patent law. Patents evolved from letter patents issued by the monarch to grant monopolies over particular industries to skilled individuals with new techniques, okay? Originally intended to strengthen England's economy, nobody else's economy, but who? England's economy. If you did it for anybody else other than England, it violates antitrust law, okay? It violates Shelley's law, okay, or Shelley's case. The system gradually became seen as a way to raise money through charging patent holders without having to incur the public unpopularity of tax. All right? Very, very important. All right? This was called the Statutes of Monopoly. Where did it originate from? Let's see. Let's go to background. Background of the Statute of Monopolies, okay? And this was passed by King James I, assumed to be the first king of England. He was not the first king of England because the law governing monopoly was already in place by Edward II as we can see here, of the Plantagenet crown. Okay, our ancestors. He was called Edward of Carnarvon. Historically, English patent law was based on a custom and the common law, not on statute. You hear that? Not on statute. So there was no legislative intent based upon statute of monopoly. It was based upon common law, which is what we call case law or stare decisis, which we're going to revisit before I close out. Okay? History English patent laws were based on the customs in the common law, not on statute. It began as the crowns granted patents as a form of economic protection to ensure high industrial production. As gifts from the crown, there was no judicial review, oversight, or consideration, and no actual law developed around that patent. Why? Because it was a grant from the crown. It was a grant from the king. It was a grant from the minor. So you didn't have to register. You didn't have to be recorded because it was a direct conveyance from the owner to the giver, i.e., what we call testator, what they call it, settler, truster, and beneficiary. Okay? As given from the crown, there was no judicial review, oversight, or consideration, and no actual law developed around the patent. This practice came from the guilds, grounds who were controlled by the crown and held monopolies over particular industries. By the 14th century, the economy of England was lagging behind, and that other European nations, with the guilds too small to control industrial production successfully. To remedy this, Edward II began encouraging foreign workmen and inventors to settle in England, offering letters of protection that protected them from guilds policies on the condition that they trained English apprentices and pass on their knowledge. Did you hear that? Pass on their knowledge, the English knowledge on corporate trust, okay, for the beneficiaries of that trust, okay, must understand how important what I'm giving you is. All right, let's move forward. State monopoly. All right, what is a state monopoly? Let's look at it. In economics, a government monopoly or public monopoly is a form of coercive monopoly in which a government agency or government corporation, and we know what Chinna versus Georgia says, every state, singly or the United States unified, is in fact a corporation, subordinate to the king because the king creates corporations. We know Lee versus Harris says that all corporate powers derive their authority from the state under the state law in which that corporation came to be an entity. Okay, so if the government is a monopoly, known as a public monopoly, in a coercive monopoly, then that lets you know that your government is in fact fraudulent. All right. In economics, a government monopoly or public monopoly is a form of coercive monopoly in which government agencies or government corporation is the sole provider of a particular good or services in competition is prohibited by law. It is a monopoly created, owned, and operated by the government. It is usually distinguished from a government-granted monopoly, where the government grants a monopoly to private individual or company. In this case, we're talking about government-granted monopolies. That's talking about letter patent or charter versus those who are licensed as the occupational license through occupational closure, which is called barrier entry to those who are not skilled. Why? Because they want to keep it quiet. Okay? That's known as your local monopoly. We know that all those monopolies, what you want to call the local government, state, are fraudulent because the granting of it was not granted by the authority that was allowed to grant it, as we read in regards to what we call letter patent. All right? We must make this make sense. All right? So in closing, political corruption. All right? So we understand that, and we just read, political, what was it? Gilded Age. All right, going back to Gilded Age. So at the time of the Gilded Age, all right, which was the time between 1870 and 1890, which was the Reconstruction era and the Progressive era, okay? At that time, a lot of political corruption was going on and institutional corruption going on based upon the institutions that were created at that particular time, which is based upon what we call trust business, misusing trust law, okay, to steal the trust from the beneficiaries as 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 a result of them not acting as trustees, okay, as established from the trustor. All right, very important for you to understand that. Okay, what is political corruption? You see it all day long. Political corruption is the use of powers by government officials or their network contacts for illegitimate private gain. Forms of corruption vary by, but can include bribery, lobbying, extortion, cronyism, nepotism, parasitism, patronage, influence peddling, graft, and embezzlement. Corruption may facilitate criminal enterprises such as drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking, although it is not restricted to these activities. Okay? Industrial corruption. What is industrial corruption? Let's look at that as well. That's what's going on, brothers and sisters, as a result of you not knowing what I'm teaching you. All right? Institutional corruption is the phenomenon in public bodies placing the protection of reputation above the fidelity to the truth, especially in the context of independent or public inquiry. Institutional corruption is differentiated from corruption by the institution's willingness to frustrate or slow the work of independent formal inquiry, even after official reports and documentation recognizes that such an inquiry is necessary. Okay? Order to show cause. All right? Very important. We need to call and put on Front Street to corruption that's been institutionalized by these political groups who are running our government today without the authority to run the government based upon it being a state monopoly. Okay? A state monopoly granted by a government that was granted by a government granted monopoly, which is called the crown. That shows a breach in the legal continuity of the crown as a result of the breach and the officers of the crown, which we see today. Okay, how we know? Let's go to the case law to back this up. Okay, and close. Standard Oil Company versus the United States, 1931. All right, 1931. All right. Listen. Historically, patent grants were only narrow exceptions to the general public policy against monopolies, which was developed from the case of monopolies and culminated the statutes of monopolies by King James I. The English patents of monopoly compared the debate of the Sherman Act, which is called the Antitrust Act, all right, even apart from the limitations of the antitrust law, the monopoly granted by the patent statute is not unrestricted in scope. Okay? Why is this the case? Because King James was, in fact, a king. Sherman was not a king, but King James was the king. Edward the First was a king. Okay? Let's go to another case law to qualify this. Another Standard Oil Company case. Standard Oil Company versus New Jersey. Standard Oil Company, New Jersey versus United States, 1911. This is all the way back in 1911. Okay. And Standard Oil Company versus New Jersey of the United States, and we just read Standard Oil Company versus Standard Oil Company versus United States, and this is Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus the United States. And I got two more, okay? Two more to close out on. That was from 1931. This case from 1911 in regards to monopolies, okay? Now we know that competition laws on the development of more accurate economic conceptions and the changes in conditions of society. It came to recognize that the act prohibited by engrossing or forestalling etc. This is the laws of our ancestors. Statutes did not have the harmful tendencies which they were presumed to have when the legislation concerning them was enacted, and therefore did not justify the presumption which had previously been deduced from them. But on the contrary, such acts tended to fruit, fruitify and develop trade. In this country, also, the acts from which it was deemed there resulted a in this country also the acts from which it was deemed there resulted a part, if not all, of the injurious consequences ascribed to monopolies came to be referred to as a monopoly itself. In other words, here as has been the case in England, practical common sense caused attention to be concentrated not upon the theoretically correct name to be given to the condition or act which gave rise to the harmful result, but to the result itself and to the remedying of the evils which it had produced. Okay. Talking about trust business and trust laws. Okay. All right. We know under trust laws, there is no monopoly other than monopolies created to to flourish the kingdom. If it was not made for that intent and purposes, that so-called monopoly is a violation of antitrust law. Okay, I don't care who it is, McDonald's, Walmart, you're in violation of the law. Okay. Now they got us working as if we're their laborers. Totally violate the antitrust law established by Edward III. Okay, very important. Let me get to it. If any monopoly or corporation is going to work for, it should be that of our ancestors. Okay, you're going to get up and work a 9 to 5, you should be working for your ancestors. Okay, nobody else. No foreign corporate monopolized franchise should have that power to subjugate you in what we call wage slavery. It's called wage slavery, brothers and sisters. That is, in fact, a legal term. Wage slavery, and is done by institutional corruption under political corruption when it's authorized by the public, okay, the government. It has 94 pages at the bottom. I don't want to over it, so I have to wait patiently. Uh, for now, that's the problem. Almost here. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus United States, 1911, we just read Standard Oil Company versus United States, 1931. Okay, all in regards to monopolies. Okay, which recognize the statute of monopoly by King James as well as Shelley's case as well as antitrust law. Okay, all that's recognized. All right, so this is a 1911 case. We should endeavor then first to seek the meaning not by indulging in an elaborate and learned analysis of the English law and of the law of this country, but by making a very brief reference to the elementary and indisputable conception of both English and American law on the subject prior to the passage of the Antitrust Law Act. It is certain that at a very remote period, the words contract and restraint of trade in England came to refer to the same voluntary restraint put by contract by an individual on his right to carry on his trade or calling. Okay, this is called a guild. Originally, all such contracts were considered to be what? Illegal, because it was deemed they were injurious to the public as well as to the individuals who made them. Okay? In the interest of freedom of the individual to contract, this doctrine was modified so that it was only when a restraint by contract was so general as to the conterminous with the kingdom that it was treated as void. So general has to be coterminous, but the kingdom that it was treated as void. That is to say, if the restraint was partial in the operation, it was otherwise reasonable. The contract was held to be valid. Monopolies were defined by Lord Coke as follows. Everybody listen to what Lord Coke says about monopolies, okay? A monopoly is an institution or allowance by the king by his grant, commission, or otherwise to any person or persons, body politics, or corporate, or for the sole buying, selling, making, working, or use of anything, whereby any person or person, body politic, or corporate are sought to be restrained of any freedom or liberty that they had before hindering any lawful trade. Hawkins thus defined them. A monopoly is an allowance by the king to a particular person or person of the sole buying, selling, making, working, or use of anything whereby the subject in general is restrained from the freedom of manufacture or trade which has been before. These are called conditions, brothers and sisters, on the conveyance by the grantor to the grantee, which makes it what? Everybody said, defeasible in nature. The frequent granting of monopolies and the struggles which led to the denial of the power to create them, that is to say, to the establishment that they were incompatible. You hear that? That they were incompatible with the English Constitution, and is known to all and need not be revealed. The evils which led to the public outcry against monopolies and to the final denial of the power to make them may be thus summarily stated. 1. The power which monopoly gave to the one who enjoyed it to a fixed price and thereby injured the public. 2. The power which it engendered or enabling a limitation on production. And 3. The danger of deterioration and quality of the monopolized article, which it was deemed was the inevitable resultant of a monopolistic control over its production and sale. As a monopoly, as thus conceived and embracing only a consequence arising from the exertion of a sovereign power, nor expression, restriction, or prohibition obtained against the creation by an individual of a monopoly as such, but as it was considered, at least as far as necessary of life were concerned, that the individuals, by the abuse of their right to contract, might be able to usurp the power arbitrarily to enhance the prices, one of the wrongs arising from monopoly. It came to be that laws were passed related to the offense, such as forestalling, regrading, and engrossing, by which prohibition were placed upon the power of individuals to deal under such circumstances and conditions as according to the conception of the time, creating a presumption that the dealings were not simply the honest exertion of one's right to contact for his own benefit, unaccompanied by a wrongful motive to injure others, but were the consequence of a contract or course of dealing of such a character as to give rise to the presumption of the intent to injure others through the means, for instance, of a monopolistic increase of prices. Okay, this is totally against competition law that originated from Anglo-Saxon law. It's right here. Right here. So there you had the presidents qualifying. The presidents qualifying what we were just saying. Right here. Legislation in England to control monopolies and restricted practices were enforced well before the Norman Conquest. The Doomsday Book, or what we call the Book of Law of Judgment, recorded that forestalling or engrossing the practice of buying of goods before they reached the market and then inflating the prices was one of the 3 forfeitures that the King Edward the Confessor could carry out through England and all the successor kings, brothers and sisters. That includes me as well. Okay? Very, very, very important. So in closing, in rare states, in what's it called? In rare state, Liechtenstein. We're going to close out on this case. The doctrine of the Worthier title exists in New Jersey as the rule of construction, creating an interference or presumption that a settler intended to create a reversionary right or amendment right or a vested right or a future interest right or what we call a doctrine of Worthier title right by way of he may overcome by evidence showing a contrary intention. Generally, a settler intention must be ascertained from the terms of the entire trust taken as a whole. So concerning the entire trust or the entire estate, which is the lodio, the English people are the ones who have a worthier title based upon the title that people are now in possession of called the feasible titles. People are in possession of the feasible title, and as a result of that, you can show a what? Clear chain of title. Okay? You cannot show a clear chain of title to the original grantor. That one person will be the king. Okay? This is the reason why, under the common law, as it states here, under the feasible estates, surely the common law has frowned upon the use of the feasible estates as it interferes with the owner's enjoyment of their property, and as such had made it difficult to create a valid future interest. A future interest is an interest, what we call condition subsequent by way of right of entry. I'm not saying it, the statute said it. Let's see it before I close out. Leeds versus Harrison. 1952 Supreme Court case, New Jersey. Corporate powers have their origin in a sovereign grant. Generally, they are derived from the Articles of Incorporation and the laws of the state under which the corporate body came into being. That's very important. Why? Because when we go to New Jersey by statute, portion is going to be -2. It shows you that the grantor put conditions on how the land will be conveyed to that trustee on behalf of the beneficiary. Let's read it for ourselves. It was called the Tenure and Abolition Act of 1660, when it involves the king, his body of politics, corporate, and any other person who are subject to the king or i.e. his peerage. It says here, in closing, the tenures of honors, manors, and lands, and the tenements or hereditaments of the estates of an inheritance at the common law, held either by who? The King of England or any other person or body politic corporate at any time before July 4th, 1276, is remain in freeing common soakage. Okay? So you must understand that, so that way that we can understand who to look to for the conveyance of returning of the estate back to the true heirs. So with that, I'm greeted you as I always meet you, and that's in peace and love. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. There's the comments in the chat box, as well as the comment box, as well as the free donation to $sign Cliff Jefferson L or the Third Community Church of England. With that, peace, beloved.